In the mists of medieval Europe, where faith and steel shaped the destiny of nations, there existed an order so powerful that kings trembled before them and popes sought their counsel. The Knights Templar, warriors of God, guardians of secrets, masters of wealth beyond imagination. What if I told you that the story you know is but a whisper of the truth? That beneath their white mantles, bearing the blood-red cross, lay mysteries so profound that entire kingdoms conspired to bury them forever. Tonight, as shadows lengthen and the veil between past and present grows thin, we shall journey into the heart of one of history's greatest conspiracies. We shall walk the halls where Templars once trod, feel the weight of their secrets, and witness the betrayal that shook Christendom to its very foundations. For in the end, the Knights Templar were destroyed not by Muslim scimitars or battlefield defeat, but by something far more dangerous, the truth they carried and the fear it inspired in those who wielded earthly power. Close your eyes and let the centuries fall away. Listen carefully, for the stones remember, and tonight they shall speak of power, of secrets, and of a betrayal so complete that its echoes still resonate through the corridors of history. The year was 1119, and Jerusalem trembled under the weight of pilgrims' feet. The holy city had been wrested from Muslim control barely 2 decades before. Yet the roads that led to Christ's tomb ran red with the blood of the faithful. In the shadow of Solomon's temple, 9 knights knelt before Hugista Paeons, their voices barely above a whisper as they swore an oath that would echo through eternity. They were poor knights, they claimed, bound by sacred vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. But poverty was the first mask they would wear, for within these humble beginnings lay the seeds of an empire that would span continents. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, such was their chosen name, though history would remember them simply as the Templars. King Baldwin II of Jerusalem granted them quarters within the very foundations of Solomon's temple, that sacred ground where legends whispered of hidden treasures and divine mysteries. Here, beneath ancient stones that had witnessed the glory of biblical kings, the Templars began their true work. What did they discover in those shadowed halls? What secrets lay buried beneath the rubble of empires? The chronicles speak of excavations, of midnight labors, of artifacts whose nature was never recorded but whose power shaped the destiny of the order. For 9 long years, they remained in those hallowed chambers, their numbers unchanged, their purpose seemingly singular, the protection of pilgrims. Yet when they finally emerged from their stony sanctuary, they bore with them something far more valuable than gold. They carried the weight of Solomon's legacy, and with it, the foundation of power that would make them the most feared and respected order in all Christendom. The transformation had begun, from humble knights to keepers of mysteries that predated Christ himself. The temple had chosen its guardians well, and the guardians had accepted a burden that would define the next 2 centuries of history. In the sacred geometry of ancient stones, the future was written in shadows and secrets. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, the most influential monk of his age, penned the words that would legitimize what many saw as a contradiction. Warrior monks who could kill in God's name without sin staining their souls. His treatise in praise of the new knighthood became the theological foundation for holy war. The Knight of Christ may strike with confidence and die yet more confidently, Bernard wrote, for he serves Christ when he strikes, and serves himself when he falls. These words transformed simple knights into instruments of divine will. The Templars' distinctive white mantle, bestowed by the Pope himself, set them apart from all other military orders. The red cross that adorned their left shoulder was not merely decoration, it was a symbol of martyrdom. of blood willingly shed for the sacred cause. But it was in the crucible of battle that the Templars truly forged their legend. At the Second Crusade, when Christian armies faced the brilliant military mind of Saladin, it was the Templars who held the line. Their discipline was legendary, their courage in combat unmatched. Yet even as their reputation as warriors grew, a parallel transformation was taking place. The pilgrims they protected carried not only prayers but also purses, and the Templars developed an intricate system to safeguard both spiritual and material treasures. From the ports of Europe to the gates of Jerusalem, Templar commanderies became beacons of security. A pilgrim could deposit silver in Paris and withdraw gold in Antioch, all guaranteed by the Templar seal. Banking was born in the shadow of the cross. The order's wealth grew exponentially. Donations poured in from nobles seeking divine favor, from merchants grateful for safe passage, from kings who recognized the value of Templar alliances. Entire estates, castles, and even cities fell under Templar control. By the dawn of the 13th century, the poor knights had become anything but poor. They owned vast tracts of land across Europe, maintained fleets of ships, and commanded resources that rivaled those of kings. Power, it seemed, was their true calling. The Templars revolutionized not just warfare, but the very concept of wealth itself. In an age when lending money at interest was considered sinful usury, they found ways to profit while maintaining the appearance of piety. Their innovations would lay the foundation for modern banking. Letters of credit replaced dangerous shipments of coin. A complex network of Templar houses across Europe and the Holy Land processed transactions with efficiency that would not be matched for centuries. They invented concepts that we now take for granted: checks, investment portfolios, and international finance. But their true genius lay in understanding that information was more valuable than gold. Every merchant who passed through their doors, every pilgrim who sought their protection, every knight who joined their ranks, all became sources of intelligence that the order catalogued and leveraged. The Templars knew which ports were safe, which trade routes were profitable, which kingdoms were on the verge of war. This knowledge made them indispensable to monarchs and merchants alike. They became the medieval world's first multinational corporation. Their headquarters in Paris became the financial center of Europe. Kings deposited their treasures in Templar vaults, knowing that no other institution could guarantee such security. The French royal treasury itself was managed by Templar administrators. Yet with great wealth came great suspicion. Whispers began to circulate about the true source of Templar riches. How had knights bound by vows of poverty amassed such fortunes? What dark arts did they practice in their secret chambers? The answer, if the chronicles are to be believed, lay not in earthly transactions, but in otherworldly knowledge. For the Templars had inherited more than just Solomon's gold. They had inherited Solomon's wisdom, and wisdom, properly applied, was the greatest treasure of all. In the shadow of their success, however, the seeds of their destruction were already being sown. For power attracts envy, wealth breeds resentment, and secrets inspire fear in those who are excluded from them. The Templar cross was more than heraldry. It was a key to mysteries that stretched back to the dawn of civilization. 8-pointed, perfectly symmetrical, it represented the Beatitudes, the directions of space, and the cycles of time. But to those initiated into deeper mysteries, it meant something far more profound. Within Templar architecture, sacred geometry spoke to those who knew how to read its language. Their churches deviated from traditional Christian layouts, incorporating elements that echoed Solomon's temple, pyramids of ancient Egypt, and stellar alignments known only to the initiated. The famous Templar churches, round structures that defied convention were built according to principles that predated Christianity. These circular temples mirrored the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but their proportions revealed knowledge of mathematical constants that would not be discovered by mainstream scholars for centuries. In the crypts beneath these sacred buildings, initiates underwent rituals that transformed simple knights into guardians of ancient wisdom. These ceremonies, conducted by flickering candlelight, involved symbols and practices that connected the neophyte to an unbroken chain stretching back to the earliest mystery schools. The skull and crossbones, later associated with pirates and poison, was a Templar symbol representing the death of the ego and rebirth into higher consciousness. The two pillars, Yakin and Boaz, which supported Solomon's temple, became architectural elements in Templar structures worldwide. Their seals bore curious inscriptions, phrases in Latin that held multiple meanings, numerical codes that revealed themselves only to those versed in gematria, and images that served as maps to hidden knowledge. The famous seal showing two knights on a single horse was not merely a symbol of poverty, but a representation of duality transcended. The green man, that ancient fertility symbol, appeared carved in stone throughout Templar properties. This pagan figure, integrated into Christian iconography, hinted at the syncretic nature of Templar beliefs, a fusion of traditions that Orthodox Christianity would have considered heretical. Even their battle standard, the Bozint, carried esoteric meaning. Black and white squares represented the balance between light and darkness, good and evil, the eternal dance of opposing forces that creates the dynamic tension necessary for growth and transformation. No discussion of Templar mysteries can avoid the most tantalizing legend of all, their connection to the Holy Grail. Was it merely the cup that caught Christ's blood at Calvary, or did it represent something far more profound and dangerous to established religious authority? Medieval romances spoke of a sacred vessel hidden in Templar custody, protected by the most elite knights of the order, but initiates whispered of different mysteries, bloodlines preserved, sacred feminine wisdom protected, and documents that could shake the very foundations of Christianity. The Grail, in its esoteric interpretation, represented the divine feminine principle that had been systematically suppressed by patriarchal religious structures. The Templars, some scholars suggest, were guardians not just of a cup, but of an entire alternative understanding of Christ's mission and message. Hidden within their commanderies were libraries that contained texts predating the Council of Nicaea, gospels rejected by Orthodox Christianity, and wisdom traditions that painted a very different picture of the early church. These documents, if revealed, could have undermined papal authority entirely. The legendary treasure of the Templars encompassed more than gold and silver. Ancient manuscripts written in dead languages, astronomical calculations that revealed the true age of the world, alchemical formulas that promised transformation of both matter and spirit. These were the true treasures that made the order so dangerous. Templar expeditions to the Holy Land were not merely military campaigns, but archaeological ventures. They excavated beneath the Temple Mount with the systematic thoroughness of trained archaeologists, seeking relics whose power transcended the material realm. What they discovered in those ancient tunnels, artifacts of bronze and gold, scrolls of papyrus and parchment, devices whose purpose mystified even learned men, became the foundation of Templar influence. Knowledge, they understood, was the ultimate form of power. The Ark of the Covenant itself, according to some theories, fell into Templar hands. This sacred vessel, described in biblical texts as possessing terrible power, could explain how a small order of knights came to wield influence far beyond their numbers. Behind closed doors, in chambers sealed from prying eyes, the Templars practiced rituals that would have horrified Orthodox Christians. These ceremonies, passed down through initiatory degrees, revealed the true nature of their beliefs, a synthesis of Christian mysticism, pagan wisdom, and esoteric knowledge. The infamous kiss of shame described in later trials was likely a misunderstood fragment of initiation rites that emphasized the transcendence of conventional morality. These rituals, designed to shock the initiate out of ordinary consciousness, were means of achieving spiritual transformation. Templar theology, according to surviving fragments, portrayed Christ not as the unique Son of God, but as one of many enlightened masters who had achieved divine consciousness. This heretical view, if proven, would have destroyed the Church's monopoly on salvation. The Order's relationship with Islamic mystics, particularly the Sufi traditions, exposed them to philosophical concepts that Christianity had rejected or never encountered: the unity of all religions, the primacy of direct spiritual experience over dogma, the cyclical nature of cosmic time. These ideas permeated Templar inner teachings. Within their scriptoriums, Templar scribes copied and translated texts from Arabic, Greek, and Hebrew, works of philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, and alchemy that the Church had banned or suppressed. They became repositories of humanity's intellectual heritage. The famous Templar Library at Paris contained works that would not appear in mainstream European scholarship for centuries. Treatises on optics that explained the nature of light, mathematical texts that revealed the secrets of proportion, and medical manuscripts that described surgical techniques unknown to Christian physicians. Their understanding of astronomy bordered on the prophetic. Templar calculations accurately predicted eclipses, tracked planetary movements, and revealed the precession of the equinoxes. Knowledge that implied a universe far older and more complex than Church doctrine allowed. Most dangerously, they possessed genealogical records that traced bloodlines back to antiquity, documents that could validate or destroy claims to throne and altar alike. These family histories, if revealed, could have rewritten the political map of Europe. The Jerusalem Temple held secrets that predated Christianity by a millennium, and the Templars' 9-year excavation beneath its ruins yielded treasures that transformed their understanding of history itself. What they discovered in those shadowed chambers changed not only their order, but the course of Western civilization. Ancient Jewish texts, hidden before the temple's destruction by Roman legions, contained prophecies and wisdom that the Templars recognized as authentic. These scrolls, written in Hebrew and Aramaic, revealed aspects of biblical history that contradicted official Christian doctrine. The sacred geometry embedded in Solomon's temple proportions, based on mathematical constants and astronomical observations, became the template for Templar architecture worldwide. Every Templar church, every commandery, incorporated these ancient principles in its design. Beneath the Temple Mount, in chambers carved from living rock, the Templars found evidence of civilizations that flourished before the biblical flood. Artifacts of worked metal and polished stone, inscribed with symbols that predated known writing systems, hinted at lost ages of human achievement. The Templars became the inheritors of a tradition that connected Solomon to even earlier wisdom keepers, Egyptian priest kings, Babylonian astronomer mathematicians, and the mysterious builders of megalithic monuments scattered across the ancient world. Their excavations revealed not just treasure, but technology, devices whose purpose remained mysterious but whose construction required metallurgical skills supposedly unknown to ancient peoples. These artifacts, carefully studied and preserved, gave the Templars insights into sciences that would not be discovered for centuries. The famous temple treasures, gold, silver, and precious stones, were merely the visible portion of their discoveries. The true treasure lay in knowledge, astronomical tables that revealed the cosmos' true nature, mathematical formulas that described the universe's underlying patterns, and historical records that documented humanity's forgotten past. Most significantly, they found records of other mystery schools, other groups of initiates who had preserved ancient wisdom through the collapse of civilizations. These documents revealed a hidden network of knowledge keepers that spanned continents and centuries. The relationship between the Templars and the Church resembled a marriage of convenience more than a bond of faith. While publicly the order served as the Church's military arm, privately they pursued agendas that often conflicted with papal policies and theological positions. Pope after pope found themselves dependent on Templar wealth and military might, yet increasingly suspicious of the order's growing independence. The Templars answered only to the Pope, but even papal authorities seemed to weigh lightly on their shoulders when their interests were at stake. The order's diplomatic immunity, granted by papal bull, allowed them to operate across national boundaries without interference from local authorities. They became international power brokers, mediating between kingdoms and facilitating agreements that served their own long-term strategic goals. Templar commanders often knew more about political situations than the rulers they supposedly served. Their intelligence network, built on centuries of merchant contacts and pilgrim observations, gave them insights that made them invaluable advisors and dangerous enemies. Kings who borrowed from Templar banks found themselves increasingly dependent on the order's financial support. Royal policies began to reflect Templar interests, and monarchs who opposed the order discovered that credit could be withdrawn as easily as it was extended. The Templars' relationship with the Islamic world was far more complex than simple enmity. During truces and diplomatic missions, they developed relationships with Muslim scholars, merchants, and even military commanders. These connections provided knowledge that enriched their understanding of mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. Their tolerance for other religions, while pragmatic, bordered on the heretical by medieval standards. Templar territories often became havens for Jews, Muslims, and Christian heretics fleeing persecution elsewhere. This protection was not merely humanitarian diversity of thought enriched their own intellectual pursuits. The order's interpretation of Christian doctrine grew increasingly syncretistic, incorporating elements from the traditions they encountered. This theological flexibility, while strategically useful, would eventually provide ammunition for those who sought their destruction. By the 13th century, the Templars had become more than a religious order. They were a shadow government operating across the known world. Their influence extended into royal courts, merchant guilds, and ecclesiastical hierarchies with a subtlety that made their true power almost invisible. Templar preceptories served as more than military bases. They were centers of learning where the order's accumulated knowledge was preserved and expanded. Scribes, translators, and scholars worked alongside knights and sergeants, creating a synthesis of warrior and sage that was unique in medieval Europe. The order's recruitment practices revealed their true priorities. While they welcomed noble knights for their military prowess and political connections, they also actively sought men of learning, physicians, mathematicians, astronomers, and linguists, whose skills served the order's broader mission. Their agricultural innovations transformed the lands under their control. Templar estates became models of efficiency, incorporating techniques learned in the East with European traditions. Their windmills, irrigation systems, and crop rotation methods increased productivity and demonstrated the practical applications of their theoretical knowledge. The Templar navy, though less famous than their cavalry, controlled shipping routes across the Mediterranean and beyond. Their vessels carried more than pilgrims and supplies. They transported ideas, technologies, and treasures that connected East and West in an unprecedented network of cultural exchange. Within major European cities, Templar houses functioned as embassies, banks, and intelligence centers simultaneously. Foreign merchants, traveling scholars, and diplomatic missions all passed through Templar facilities, providing the order with information that kept them ahead of political developments. Their charitable works, while genuine expressions of Christian duty, also served strategic purposes. Hospitals, schools, and orphanages created networks of grateful beneficiaries who provided the order with eyes and ears throughout society. Information flowed upward through these channels to Templar administrators. The order's legal expertise rivaled that of the Church itself. Templar lawyers negotiated treaties, resolved disputes, and crafted agreements that protected their interests while appearing to serve the common good. They became masters of the art of influence without obvious coercion. As the 13th century drew to a close, the Templars faced challenges that their military prowess and financial acumen could not overcome. The loss of the Holy Land to Muslim reconquest removed their primary justification for existence, while their accumulated wealth and power made them targets for envious monarchs. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, ruled a kingdom perpetually short of funds. His expensive wars and lavish court consumed resources faster than traditional taxation could provide them. The sight of Templar wealth, stored in their impregnable fortress within Paris itself, became an increasingly bitter reminder of his own limitations. The Templars' financial relationship with the French crown was complex and ultimately fatal. They served as the royal treasury's administrators, handling the kingdom's finances with efficiency that highlighted the monarchy's dependence on their expertise. This arrangement, while profitable for both parties, created resentment that would prove deadly. Pope Clement V, a Frenchman elected through Philip's influence, found himself caught between loyalty to his homeland and duty to the Church. The Templars' direct relationship to the papal throne theoretically protected them from royal interference, but political realities made this protection increasingly hollow. Rumors about Templar practices, circulating for decades in whispered conversations, began to coalesce into formal accusations. Tales of secret rituals, heretical beliefs, and immoral practices, whether true, distorted, or entirely fabricated, provided ammunition for those who sought the order's destruction. The Templars themselves seemed oblivious to the gathering danger. Secure in their power and confident in their papal protection, they continued their activities without recognizing how completely the political landscape had shifted beneath their feet. Intelligence reports reaching Templar commanders spoke of unusual meetings between royal officials and church authorities, of secret correspondence between Paris and Avignon, of preparations whose purpose remained unclear but whose scope suggested something unprecedented was being planned. The last Grand Master, Jacques de Mar, received warnings from sympathizers within the royal court, but the nature of the threat seemed impossible to comprehend. An order that had defied Muslim armies, outlasted Crusader kingdoms, and accumulated power across continents could not conceive of destruction coming from Christian allies. October 13, 1307, a date that would forever be associated with betrayal and misfortune. Before dawn broke across France, royal agents moved with coordinated precision to arrest every Templar they could find. The operation, planned in absolute secrecy, caught the order completely unprepared. Sealed orders, opened simultaneously across the kingdom, contained identical accusations: heresy, blasphemy, obscene rituals, and idolatry. The charges were specific enough to seem credible, general enough to be unanswerable, and inflammatory enough to justify the arrest of men who had previously been considered beyond reproach. Jacques de Maure, Grand Master of the Temple, was taken into custody at the Paris Temple along with 60 of his knights. The man who had led Christian warriors against Muslim armies found himself chained in the dungeons of a Christian king, accused of crimes against the faith he had sworn to defend. The speed and scope of the arrests revealed months of careful preparation. Royal officials had identified Templar properties, catalogued their assets, and positioned forces to prevent escape or resistance. The order that had survived 2 centuries of warfare was destroyed in a single morning. Philip's justification for this unprecedented action was couched in religious terms. He claimed to be defending Christianity against corruption within its own ranks, protecting the faithful from wolves in sheep's clothing. The irony was lost on few observers. The king, who had repeatedly borrowed from Templar funds, now portrayed them as threats to Christian virtue. The reaction across Europe was mixed. Some monarchs, influenced by Philip's example and tempted by Templar wealth within their own borders, began similar proceedings. Others, recognizing the dangerous precedent of destroying an order protected by papal immunity, hesitated to act. Pope Clement V, caught between his obligations as church leader and his dependence on French support, attempted to maintain neutrality while asserting papal jurisdiction over the proceedings. His efforts to control the situation revealed the extent to which the papacy itself had become subordinate to French political interests. The Templars, trained for battlefield combat, found themselves fighting a different kind of war, one conducted in courtrooms and torture chambers, where their military skills were useless and their enemies wielded weapons of law, politics, and public opinion. The techniques employed against the Templars had been perfected during previous inquisitions against heretical movements. Physical torture, psychological pressure, and legal manipulation combined to create confessions that supported predetermined conclusions, while maintaining the appearance of judicial process. Medieval torture was both art and science, designed to extract admissions while leaving victims alive to testify. The rack, the wheel, the iron boots, each device served specific purposes in breaking human resistance to inquisitorial demands. Templar knights, trained to endure battlefield wounds, discovered that judicial torture followed different rules. The confessions that emerged under these conditions painted a picture of an order corrupted by power and wealth, tales of initiation ceremonies that mocked Christian symbols, of worship directed toward mysterious idols, of practices that violated both religious law and natural morality filled the trial records. Yet the consistency of these confessions raised questions among careful observers. The similarity of details across different prisoners, interrogated in separate locations by different officials, suggested either genuine widespread corruption or carefully coordinated fabrication of evidence. Geoffroy de Charny, preceptor of Normandy, initially confessed to the charges but later recanted, declaring that his admission had been obtained through torture and was entirely false. His courage in retracting his testimony, knowing it meant certain death, cast doubt on the reliability of other confessions. The famous confession of Jacques de Maure himself followed a similar pattern: initial admission, followed by retraction and denial. The Grand Master's final statement, delivered before his execution, proclaimed the order's innocence and predicted divine vengeance on those who had destroyed it unjustly. Independent observers noted inconsistencies in the accusations. Charges varied from region to region, suggesting that local authorities were adapting their cases to fit available evidence rather than uncovering actual crimes. The political motivations behind the trials became increasingly difficult to ignore. The papal investigation, theoretically independent of royal influence, nevertheless relied heavily on confessions obtained under French torture. Pope Clement V's attempts to conduct genuine inquiries were repeatedly undermined by the tainted nature of the available evidence and the political pressures surrounding the case. Not all of Europe accepted the charges against the Templars without question. In several kingdoms, independent investigations reached conclusions that contradicted French accusations, revealing the extent to which political considerations had influenced the judicial process. In England, King Edward II initially resisted pressure to arrest the Templars, arguing that the order had served faithfully and deserved fair treatment. Only papal pressure and French diplomatic intervention eventually forced him to act. And even then, the English proceedings were notably less severe than their French counterparts. Portuguese and Spanish investigations found little evidence to support the charges. The Iberian Templars, actively engaged in the Reconquista against Muslim territories, enjoyed popular support that made prosecution difficult. Some Spanish kingdoms refused to participate in the suppression at all. The German response was particularly telling. The Holy Roman Emperor, traditionally suspicious of French expansion and papal authority, ordered his own investigation. The results, while never fully publicized, apparently failed to substantiate the accusations against the order. Individual Templars who escaped the initial arrests carried news of the persecution to sympathetic courts and religious houses. Their testimonies, preserved in various archives, provided alternative narratives that challenged official accounts of corruption and heresy. Some scholars and churchmen, recognizing the dangerous precedent of destroying a papal order through royal action, attempted to intervene on the Templars' behalf. Their efforts, while ultimately unsuccessful, preserved records that revealed the political machinations behind the religious rhetoric. The University of Paris, despite pressure from royal authorities, produced faculty opinions that questioned the legal basis for the proceedings. These academic dissents, couched in careful language, nonetheless provided intellectual ammunition for those who doubted the accusations. Even within France, not all ecclesiastical authorities supported the prosecution. Several bishops and abbots privately expressed doubts about the charges, though few dared to voice public opposition to policies that clearly enjoyed royal favor. As the trials progressed and the order's destruction became inevitable, something unprecedented occurred: the systematic disappearance of Templar wealth, documents, and personnel. Despite royal efforts to secure all assets, vast portions of the order's resources simply vanished. The Templar fleet, supposedly secured in various European ports, sailed away on the night before the arrests. These ships, carrying unknown cargo and crews, disappeared into Atlantic waters and were never seen again by royal authorities. Their destination and fate remain among history's great mysteries. Documents that should have filled royal archives proved frustratingly scarce, while financial records and routine correspondence were found in abundance. The order's most sensitive materials, the texts that contained their deepest secrets, were conspicuously absent from captured collections. Templar treasuries, expected to yield vast hoards of gold and silver, proved surprisingly empty. While some wealth was recovered, the amounts fell far short of what intelligent sources had suggested existed. Where had the missing treasure gone? Several prominent Templars who should have been arrested were never found. These men, warned by unknown sources or blessed by extraordinary luck, escaped the net that caught their brothers. Their subsequent fate and activities became subjects of speculation and legend. Underground networks, possibly prepared in advance, facilitated the escape of selected personnel and materials. These operations demonstrated planning and resources that suggested that the Order's leadership had anticipated their persecution and prepared accordingly. The few Templars who later broke their silence spoke of predetermined plans, of safe houses and hidden sanctuaries, of alternative identities prepared years in advance. The Order that appeared surprised by its persecution had apparently been planning for such eventualities. Royal investigators, despite extensive efforts, never fully accounted for the missing elements of Templar wealth and knowledge. Official reports acknowledged significant discrepancies between expected and recovered assets, though they avoided speculating about where the remainder might have gone. March 18, 1314, on a small island in the Seine River, Jacques Demar faced his final test. The Grand Master, who had led the Order through its darkest hours, would die as he had lived, defying those who sought to break the Templar spirit through fear and pain. The pyre had been prepared with careful attention to symbolic detail. The location, visible from the royal palace, ensured that the king could witness the end of the Order that had once commanded his respect and fear. The timing, at sunset, created dramatic lighting that would impress spectators with the solemnity of royal justice. As flames began to consume the wood at his feet, Demar raised his voice in a final declaration that witnesses would never forget. He proclaimed the Order's innocence, called upon God to witness their persecution, and issued a prophecy that would haunt his executioners for generations to come. God knows the truth, the dying Grand Master cried, and the truth will be made known. Before a year is out, Pope and King will follow me to divine judgment. His words, carrying across the water with supernatural clarity, sent chills through the assembled crowd. The accuracy of Demar's prediction would become legendary. Pope Clement V died of illness within a month, his body racked by disease that physicians could neither explain nor treat. King Philip the Fair perished in a hunting accident before the year ended, fulfilling the condemned man's prophecy with eerie precision. Geoffroy de Charny, the preceptor of Normandy who had chosen martyrdom over perjury, died beside his Grand Master with equal courage. These two men, representing centuries of Templar tradition, faced death with dignity that impressed even their enemies and critics. The flames that consumed their bodies could not destroy what they represented. The ideals they embodied, loyalty, courage, and dedication to higher principles, survived their physical destruction and inspired future generations to question official narratives about power, justice, and truth. The execution marked the end of the Knights Templar as a historical institution, but it also marked the beginning of their transformation into legend. Death had freed them from the limitations of earthly existence and elevated them into the realm of eternal symbol and perpetual mystery. The destruction of the Knights Templar sent shockwaves throughout medieval society that extended far beyond the immediate participants. The precedent of a monarch destroying a papal order for political gain fundamentally altered the balance between church and state. Other military orders, recognizing their vulnerability, began adapting their structures and practices to avoid Templar-style persecution. The Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights, and smaller orders all learned lessons from their predecessors' fate and modified their operations accordingly. The Templar estates, theoretically transferred to the Hospitallers, often ended up in royal hands instead. This massive redistribution of wealth and property changed the economic landscape of Europe and provided monarchs with resources that that funded future wars and administrative expansion. Banking practices pioneered by the Templars continued under different auspices, but the trust that had made their system work was permanently damaged. International finance became more cautious, more heavily regulated, and more dependent on royal approval for its operations. The knowledge preserved in Templar libraries faced systematic destruction or dispersal. Some texts found their way into private collections or monastic libraries, but much accumulated wisdom was lost forever. The intellectual damage may have exceeded even the economic impact. Surviving Templars, scattered across Europe and beyond, maintained their traditions in secret forms. These hidden networks, operating under cover of trade guilds, noble households, or religious fraternities, preserved elements of Templar doctrine and practice for future generations. The symbolism associated with the order proved impossible to suppress. Templar crosses, architectural elements, and ritualistic practices appeared in unexpected contexts, suggesting that their influence extended far beyond official recognition or control. Popular memory transformed the Templars from historical figures into archetypal representations of betrayed loyalty and hidden wisdom. Folk tales, ballads, and legends spread their story throughout Europe, often with details that differed significantly from documented history. In Portugal, the Templar legacy took a unique form that demonstrates how political necessity could preserve what religious persecution sought to destroy. King Dinas of Portugal, faced with papal pressure to suppress the order, chose a path of creative compliance that saved both face and assets. The Order of Christ, established in 1318, was officially a new military order created to continue the Reconquista against Muslim forces. In practice, it inherited Templar properties, personnel, and traditions with minimal disruption to existing operations and arrangements. Prince Henry, the Navigator, Grand Master of the Order of Christ, financed Portuguese exploration using wealth and knowledge that traced directly back to Templar sources. The red cross that adorned Portuguese sails during the Age of Discovery was the Templar cross in all but name. The navigational knowledge that guided Portuguese expeditions included techniques and instruments that predated the official discovery of such methods by decades or centuries. This expertise, preserved within the Order of Christ, gave Portugal advantages that competitors could not match or explain. Templar astronomical tables, preserved within Portuguese archives, provided calculations that made accurate navigation possible across previously uncharted oceans. The precision of these documents suggests access to observations and mathematical techniques that were supposedly unknown to medieval Europeans. The wealth that funded Portuguese expansion included assets that were never fully accounted for in official Templar inventories. Gold, silver, and precious stones that appeared in Portuguese treasuries during the 15th century may have represented the successful evacuation of resources during the Order's persecution. Portuguese expeditions to the Americas and beyond carried symbols and practices that reflected Templar influence. The establishment of missions, the organization of colonial administration, and the integration of local populations all showed patterns consistent with Templar methods and principles. The Order of Christ maintained its identity and influence well into the modern era, providing continuity that connected medieval Templar traditions to Renaissance exploration and beyond. Through this transformation, the essential spirit of the Order survived its apparent destruction. In the mists of Scotland, beyond the reach of French influence and papal authority, fleeing Templars found sanctuary among warriors who understood the meaning of resistance. Robert the Bruce, excommunicated and embattled, welcomed allies who brought both military expertise and sacred purpose to his cause. The Battle of Bannockburn in 1314 witnessed something remarkable. Unmarked knights appearing at the crucial moment, their discipline and tactics unmistakably Templar, turning potential defeat into glorious victory. These ghost warriors vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared, leaving only legends in their wake. Scottish Masonic traditions, emerging centuries later, would claim direct descent from these refugee Templars. Whether historical fact or romantic fiction, these connections preserved symbols, rituals, and philosophies that echoed ancient Templar teachings through generations of Scottish craftsmen and nobles. The Sinclair family of Roslin, patrons of the mysterious chapel that bears their name, maintained connections to Templar survivors that influenced both architecture and belief. Roslin Chapel itself became a stone library, its carvings preserving symbols that Orthodox Christianity had forgotten or forbidden. Within the chapel's pillars and arches, initiates could read stories that predated the Gospels, geometric patterns that revealed mathematical constants, and botanical imagery that depicted plants unknown to medieval Europe. The structure served as both sanctuary and school for hidden wisdom traditions. Templar influence in Scotland extended beyond military matters into commerce, education, and governance. The principles of justice, the organization of guilds, and the development of legal codes all showed traces of Templar. Administrative expertise adapted to Highland conditions and lowland requirements. The Order of the Thistle, Scotland's highest chivalric honour, incorporated elements that reflected Templar traditions while maintaining distinct Scottish character. Its mottos, symbols, and ceremonies preserved concepts that would have been familiar to knights from the disbanded order. Even Scottish exploration of the New World carried Templar echoes. The voyages of Prince Henry Sinclair to North America, decades before Columbus, may have been guided by maps and knowledge that originated in Templar archives and survived through carefully maintained networks. Venice, that republic of merchants where pragmatism trumped ideology, provided another avenue for Templar survival and transformation. The city-state's complex relationship with both church and empire created opportunities for those skilled in navigating political ambiguity. Venetian banking houses, already sophisticated before the Templar dissolution, absorbed fleeing members who brought centuries of financial expertise and international connections. These partnerships created hybrid institutions that combined Venetian commercial acumen with Templar organizational principles. The famous glass furnaces of Murano may have benefited from alchemical knowledge that Templars brought from their Eastern experiences. Techniques for creating crystal-clear glass, mirrors of unprecedented quality, and colors that defied reproduction all appeared in Venetian workshops during this period. Marco Polo's accounts of Eastern wonders included descriptions of technologies and practices that suggested access to information preserved in Templar archives. His detailed knowledge of Asian customs, languages, and trade routes exceeded what could be explained by a single journey's observations. Venetian ships carried more than trade goods across Mediterranean and Atlantic waters. They transported ideas, technologies, and individuals whose identities were carefully concealed, but whose influence shaped the Renaissance that would soon transform European consciousness. The Arsenal of Venice, that revolutionary shipyard that pioneered mass production techniques, incorporated organizational methods that reflected Templar understanding of logistics, quality control, and systematic efficiency. These innovations gave Venice naval supremacy that lasted for centuries. Venetian diplomatic practices, famously effective in maintaining the Republic's independence, showed signs of Templar influence in their sophistication and long-term strategic thinking. Ambassadors trained in these methods became legendary for their ability to negotiate favorable terms under impossible circumstances. The preservation of Byzantine manuscripts, Greek philosophical texts, and Islamic scientific treatises within Venetian libraries may have benefited from Templar knowledge of what materials were most valuable and where they could be found. This cultural preservation enriched the coming Renaissance. The Swiss cantons, emerging as independent communities through military alliance and mutual defense, attracted Templar refugees who found familiar principles in these mountain societies. The values of collective responsibility, military preparedness, and resistance to outside authority resonated with disbanded knights. Swiss banking, destined to become synonymous with discretion and security, may have originated from Templar financial practices adapted to Alpine conditions. The principles of client confidentiality, international neutrality, and systematic record-keeping all showed characteristics of Templar methodology. The famous Swiss Guard, protectors of the Pope himself, incorporated training methods and organizational structures that reflected military traditions preserved from the disbanded order. These papal protectors, ironically, may have descended from the very knights their employer had helped destroy. Alpine architecture began incorporating elements that echoed Templar design principles. Churches, guild halls, and private residences showed geometric proportions and symbolic details that preserved sacred mathematics in stone and timber. These buildings served as textbooks for those who knew how to read their lessons. Swiss precision in craftsmanship, evident in everything from clockmaking to weapon forging, reflected standards of excellence that Templars had maintained in their workshops and scriptoriums. The pursuit of perfection became both practical necessity and spiritual discipline. The Confederation's military tactics, particularly their pike formations and disciplined infantry, showed innovations that may have originated from Templar understanding of battlefield dynamics. These techniques gave Swiss mercenaries legendary status and influenced military development across Europe. Remote alpine valleys provided perfect sanctuaries for preserving dangerous knowledge and practicing forbidden arts. Isolated communities, accessible only to trusted individuals, maintained traditions that connected medieval mysticism to Renaissance science and philosophy. The Swiss principle of direct democracy, revolutionary in its time. REFLECTED, Templar concepts of brotherhood and collective decision-making. These political innovations, tested in mountain communities, would eventually influence democratic movements worldwide. Across Atlantic waters, in lands unknown to medieval European maps, evidence suggests that Templar influence may have preceded official discovery by centuries. Stone towers, runic inscriptions, and artifacts found in New England have puzzled archaeologists and inspired theories about pre-Columbian European contact. Newport Tower in Rhode Island, officially dismissed as a colonial windmill, displays architectural features that echo Templar round churches. Its proportions, orientation, and construction methods suggest knowledge of sacred geometry that European colonists supposedly lacked. The Kensington runestone, discovered in Minnesota and controversial among scholars, contains inscriptions that some interpret as evidence of 14th century Scandinavian explorers, possibly connected to Templar refugee networks. If authentic, it revolutionizes understanding of pre-Columbian American history. Oak Island in Nova Scotia has yielded mysterious artifacts and engineering works that suggest systematic treasure, burial by individuals with considerable resources and advanced technical knowledge. The The parallels to Templar organizational methods and secrecy practices have inspired decades of speculation and investigation. Native American legends speak of pale-skinned visitors who arrived from the Eastern Sea, bringing knowledge of metallurgy, astronomy, and building techniques. These stories, dismissed as fantasy by traditional historians, gain credibility when viewed alongside physical evidence of unexplained European artifacts. The layout of certain early American settlements, particularly in New England, reflects planning principles that echo Templar town design. The integration of defensive positions, agricultural areas, and religious centers suggests knowledge of medieval military architecture and urban planning. Freemasonry's rapid growth in colonial America may have benefited from existing networks of individuals who maintained connections to older traditions. The speed with which Masonic lodges established themselves suggests foundations that predated official settlement by decades or centuries. The American Revolution's ideological foundations, individual liberty, resistance to tyranny, and the primacy of natural law, reflected philosophical concepts that Templars had preserved and developed through centuries of persecution and survival. These ideas found fertile ground in colonial soil. Freemasonry's emergence in the 18th century provided the most visible continuation of Templar traditions, though the exact nature of this connection remains debated among historians and Masons themselves. The similarities in symbolism, ritual structure, and philosophical emphasis suggest deeper connections than mere coincidence. The 3 degrees of Masonic initiation echo the hierarchical structure of the Templar order, while the emphasis on moral development, brotherhood, and the preservation of ancient wisdom clearly parallels Templar ideals. The transformation from operative to speculative Masonry mirrors the Templars' evolution from military to mystical pursuits. Masonic symbols, the square and compass, the all-seeing eye, the checkered floor, all find precedence in Templar iconography and earlier mystery traditions. These emblems served as teaching tools, conveying complex philosophical concepts through visual imagery that initiates gradually learned to interpret. The Masonic lodge structure, with its orientation to cardinal directions and symbolic arrangement of officers and furniture, recreated the sacred geometry that Templars had incorporated into their own ceremonial spaces. These architectural principles preserved ancient wisdom about the relationship between earthly and cosmic order. Masonic degrees beyond the basic 3, particularly those claiming Templar heritage, explicitly connect modern practitioners to medieval precedents. The Knights Templar degree, the Royal Arch, and Scottish Rite ceremonies all incorporate elements that suggest genuine historical continuity rather than mere romantic invention. The role of Freemasonry in political revolutions, American, French, and others, reflects the Templar legacy of challenging established authority when it conflicted with higher principles. These revolutionary activities demonstrated that medieval ideals of justice and liberty had survived into modern times. Masonic emphasis on education, rational inquiry, and scientific investigation continued the Templar tradition of preserving and advancing human knowledge. Masonic libraries, schools, and charitable institutions served functions similar to those performed by Templar establishments centuries earlier. The global spread of Freemasonry, establishing lodges on every continent within decades of its public emergence, suggests organizational capabilities and international networks that echo Templar methods of expansion and communication across vast distances. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign in 1798 was officially a military and political venture, but evidence suggests deeper motivations connected to the search for ancient knowledge that Templars had sought centuries earlier. the inclusion of scholars, archaeologists, and mystics in his expedition forces revealed interests beyond conventional conquest. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone during Napoleon's campaign provided the key to deciphering hieroglyphic texts that might have contained wisdom, preserved from Egypt's mystery schools. This breakthrough opened access to knowledge that initiatory traditions had maintained in fragmentary form for millennia. Napoleon's personal interest in esoteric subjects, including his documented consultations with fortune-tellers and mystics, reflected an understanding that political power required more than military force. His quest for legitimacy through connection to ancient symbols and traditions echoed Templar methods of authority building. The Great Pyramid of Giza, which Napoleon reportedly spent a night alone within, had long been associated with initiatory experiences and mystical revelations. His emergence from this ancient monument with knowledge he refused to share publicly suggests an encounter with preserved wisdom traditions. The Institute of Egypt, established by Napoleon's scholars, began systematic study of monuments and texts that revealed the sophistication of ancient Egyptian civilization. This research confirmed what initiatory traditions had maintained, that antiquity possessed knowledge that mainstream history had forgotten or ignored. The connection between Egyptian mysteries and European initiatory societies became explicit through figures like Count Cagliostro and the Egyptian rite of Freemasonry. These movements claimed direct descent from ancient Egyptian priest initiates and incorporated ritual elements that predated Christianity. Napoleon's ultimate defeat and exile may have resulted from his attempt to combine ancient wisdom with modern political ambition without understanding the spiritual prerequisites for wielding such power. His failure demonstrated that knowledge without wisdom could lead to destruction rather than elevation. The artifacts and knowledge brought back from Egypt enriched European understanding of ancient civilizations and provided new perspectives on the origins of Western spiritual traditions. This intellectual treasure proved more valuable than the military conquests that had made its acquisition possible. The 19th century witnessed a romantic revival of interest in medieval themes, including the Knights Templar, as European culture reacted against industrialization and materialism. This movement transformed historical Templars into symbols of everything that modernity seemed to have lost. Sir Walter Scott's novels, particularly Ivanhoe, presented Templars as noble warriors corrupted by wealth and power, reflecting contemporary concerns about the effects of capitalism on traditional values. These fictional portrayals influenced public perception more powerfully than historical scholarship. The Gothic revival in architecture consciously imitated medieval forms, including elements associated with Templar buildings. Churches, universities, and government buildings incorporated pointed arches, rose windows, and geometric proportions that echoed sacred architecture from the Order's era. Secret societies proliferated during this period, many claiming Templar heritage or inspiration. These organizations, ranging from serious philosophical groups to social clubs, demonstrated the continuing appeal of medieval ideals of brotherhood, initiation, and hidden knowledge. Archaeological discoveries throughout the 19th century revealed the extent of Templar influence and the sophistication of their operations. Excavations of former Templar sites uncovered artifacts, documents, and architectural features that confirmed legendary accounts previously dismissed as fantasy. The establishment of modern historical scholarship brought scientific methods to Templar studies, but also raised new questions about the relationship between documented facts and persistent legends. Academic research revealed that the truth was more complex and interesting than either orthodox or romantic accounts suggested. Templar symbolism appeared in unexpected contexts. Political movements, artistic works, and cultural institutions all incorporated crosses, geometric patterns, and architectural elements that reflected continuing fascination with the order's legacy and meaning. The democratization of education made Templar history accessible to broader audiences, while simultaneously revealing how much remained unknown or disputed. Popular interest in the order grew even as scholarly understanding of their actual practices and beliefs remained frustratingly incomplete. The 20th century brought unprecedented access to historical documents and archaeological evidence, yet Templar mysteries seemed to deepen rather than resolve. New discoveries raised as many questions as they answered, fueling theories that ranged from plausible to fantastical. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 revealed early Christian texts that differed significantly from canonical scriptures, lending credibility to theories that the Templars had possessed alternative versions of Christian history. These documents suggested that Orthodox Christianity had suppressed competing interpretations of Christ's message. Vatican's secret archives, gradually opened to researchers, contained documents related to the Templar trials that revealed the complexity of church politics during the persecution. These materials showed that even papal officials had doubted the charges while feeling powerless to resist French pressure. Archaeological investigations at former Templar sites, using modern techniques, uncovered evidence of activities that had not been documented in medieval records. Underground chambers, hidden passages, and unexplained artifacts suggested that the Order's operations had been more extensive than previously recognized. The establishment of Israel in 1948 renewed interest in Templar. Connections to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. Modern excavations in the Holy City revealed layers of history that might have been accessible to medieval Templars, supporting theories about their discoveries beneath Solomon's Temple. Popular culture embraced Templar themes with unprecedented enthusiasm. Books, films, and television series presented the Order as guardians of explosive secrets, perpetual enemies of corrupt institutions, and inspirations for modern heroes. These fictional portrayals, while historically questionable, demonstrated the continuing power of Templar symbolism. The Internet age brought democratization of information, but also proliferation of unsubstantiated theories. Online communities shared documents, photographs, and speculation that mixed genuine research with fantasy, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish credible evidence from creative fiction. Modern treasure hunting, equipped with sophisticated technology, focused attention on sites associated with hidden Templar wealth. These searches, while rarely successful in finding gold, sometimes uncovered artifacts and architectural features that advanced understanding of medieval life and beliefs. The search for the Holy Grail, forever linked with Templar legend, continues to inspire modern seekers who interpret the symbol in increasingly sophisticated ways. Contemporary researchers suggest that the Grail represents not a physical object, but a state of consciousness or body of knowledge. Glastonbury Abbey in England, traditional burial place of King Arthur and rumoured repository of Grail secrets, attracts pilgrims and researchers who seek connections between Celtic spirituality, Arthurian legend, and Templar traditions. Recent archaeological work has revealed medieval structures that may have housed alternative religious practices. The Cathar connection to Templar mysteries gained renewed attention as scholars recognized similarities between the two movements, theological perspectives, and persecution experiences. Both groups apparently possessed texts and traditions that challenged Orthodox Christian doctrine, suggesting possible collaboration or shared sources. DNA analysis and genealogical research have attempted to trace bloodlines that legendary accounts associate with Grail keepers and Templar initiates. While results remain inconclusive, these investigations have revealed medieval family connections that were previously unknown or disputed. The medieval Romance tradition, which first popularized Grail legends, is now understood to have preserved genuine historical memories within symbolic narratives. These stories, once dismissed as pure fantasy, are recognized as encoding actual knowledge about medieval esoteric traditions and practices. Modern interpretations of the Grail symbol draw upon psychological, anthropological, and comparative religion research to suggest meanings that transcend specific historical contexts. The Grail becomes a universal symbol for humanity's quest for meaning, transformation, and connection to the divine. Scientific analysis of artifacts claimed to be connected to Grail traditions has produced mixed results. While no object has been definitively authenticated as the Cup of Christ, several medieval vessels show characteristics that support theories about their significance to initiatory groups. The quest itself may be more important than its object. According to contemporary Grail researchers, the search for ultimate meaning, perfect justice, and spiritual fulfillment continues to motivate individuals and movements that trace their inspiration to medieval precedents, including the Knights Templar. Computer analysis of medieval texts has revealed hidden patterns and connections that previous scholars could not detect. Linguistic analysis, statistical studies, and cross-referencing of documents have produced new insights into Templar practices, beliefs, and international networks. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have identified previously unknown Templar sites and revealed the extent of their building programs. These technologies show that the Order's infrastructure was more comprehensive than traditional accounts suggested, supporting theories about their wealth and influence. Digital reconstruction of damaged or destroyed Templar documents has recovered information that was thought lost forever. Advanced imaging techniques can reveal texts that were deliberately obscured, overwritten, or damaged by time, providing new sources for understanding the Order's activities. Online databases and international cooperation have enabled researchers to correlate information from archives worldwide. Documents scattered across different countries and institutions can now be studied together, revealing patterns that support new theories about Templar survival and transformation. Blockchain technology has been proposed as a modern equivalent of medieval trust networks that enabled Templar banking. This comparison has led to new appreciation for the sophisticated financial instruments and international systems that the Order developed centuries before such capabilities were thought possible. Virtual reality reconstructions of Templar sites allow researchers and the public to experience these environments as they existed in medieval times. These immersive technologies provide insights into the psychological and spiritual effects that Templar architecture was designed to create. Social network analysis applied to medieval documents has mapped the relationships and communication patterns that connected Templar houses across continents. These studies reveal organizational sophistication that rivals modern multinational corporations in scope and efficiency. Crowdsourced research projects have engaged thousands of volunteers in transcribing, translating, and analyzing Templar-related documents. This democratization of historical research has accelerated discovery while raising new questions about the interpretation and significance of findings. As we stand at the threshold of a new millennium, the Knights Templar continue to haunt our collective imagination, their story resonating with themes that transcend historical specifics. They represent the eternal tension between power and principle, between worldly success and spiritual authenticity. Modern corporations, with their international reach, complex hierarchies, and accumulated wealth, mirror the Templar model in ways that suggest certain organizational patterns are timeless. The order pioneered concepts of branding, quality control, and multinational operations that define contemporary business. Political movements continue to invoke Templar imagery when seeking to legitimize resistance to corrupt authority or to symbolize dedication to higher principles. The red cross on white background appears in protests, revolutions, and reform movements worldwide, carrying meanings that transcend its medieval origins. Educational institutions, particularly those emphasizing character development alongside academic achievement, reflect Templar understanding that true knowledge encompasses moral and spiritual dimensions. The order's synthesis of warrior training, scholarly study, and ethical development remains relevant to contemporary educational philosophy. Environmental movements find inspiration in Templar land management practices, which emphasized long-term stewardship over short-term profit. Their agricultural innovations and sustainable practices offer models for modern efforts to balance human needs with ecological responsibility. The quest for alternative energy sources echoes Templar searches for ancient technologies and hidden knowledge. Modern researchers investigating free energy, anti-gravity, and other revolutionary concepts often trace inspiration to legends of Templar discoveries and suppressed innovations. Interfaith dialogue and religious tolerance movements draw upon Templar examples of cooperation with Islamic scholars and protection of religious minorities. The order's pragmatic approach to theological differences provides precedents for contemporary efforts to find common ground among competing belief systems. The continuing search for Templar treasure represents humanity's deeper quest for meaning, purpose, and connection to something greater than material existence. Whether the treasure is gold, knowledge, or wisdom, the search itself transforms those who undertake it with genuine dedication. As our journey through the shadows of history draws to its close, we find ourselves confronted with questions that may never find definitive answers. The Knights Templar, those warrior monks who strode across the medieval world like giants, remain as enigmatic in death as they were formidable in life. Perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps the mystery itself is more important than its solution, the quest more valuable than its conclusion. For in seeking to understand the Templars, we confront fundamental questions about the nature of power, the price of knowledge, and the courage required to challenge established order. The red cross that adorned their white mantles has become a symbol that transcends time and culture, representing the willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for higher principles. Whether those principles were divine commandments, ancient wisdom, or human dignity matters less than the dedication they inspired. Their treasure, whether gold hidden in Swiss valleys or wisdom preserved in secret libraries, continues to inspire seekers who understand that the most valuable discoveries are often the most dangerous to possess. The Templars learned that knowledge brings responsibility, and responsibility brings risk. The betrayal that destroyed them, orchestrated by those who should have been their protectors, reminds us that earthly institutions, however sacred their pretensions, remain vulnerable to human weakness. Fear, greed, and ambition can corrupt even the most hallowed halls. Yet their legacy survives in forms both obvious and subtle. Every time someone stands against injustice despite personal cost, every time knowledge is preserved against official suppression, every time brotherhood transcends artificial divisions, the Templar spirit lives. The stones remember, though voices are silenced. The symbols endure, though their creators have returned to dust. The principles persist, though the institutions that embodied them have fallen. And so the Knights Templar continue their eternal watch. Guardians, not of material treasure, but of ideals that define humanity's highest aspirations. In seeking their secrets, we discover our own potential. In mourning their fate, we recommit ourselves to the values they died defending. The dark truth behind the Knights Templar is perhaps not so dark after all. It is the light of human dignity refusing to be extinguished. The flame of sacred knowledge passed from hand to hand through the centuries. The eternal hope that truth will ultimately triumph over power. In the end, we are all Templars, guardians of secrets that matter more than our own lives. Keepers of light in a world too often shrouded in darkness. The red cross we bear is the mark of those who choose principle over comfort, truth over convenience, and eternity over the momentary. Their watch is ended. Ours begins.